I am Eli Yoder, and I came from a old order Amish community out of Kenton, Ohio. And I left when I turned 18 years old in 1998. So I've been out of the Amish 23 years this year. I came from a household where there was a lot of physical and mental and spiritual abuse. Because of that, I started interviewing a lot of victims that came out of the Amish and Mennonite communities. And since I started doing that, many came forward and wanted to be interviewed. They realized they were not alone. So now I have hundreds of them that I have interviewed and many more that want to be interviewed.
I'm Officer Yoder. I work for the Kenton Police Department in Ohio. My Amish family still lives in the Kenton area, which makes my job kind of unique sometimes. I'm the only one that left from my family that is in law enforcement. I try not to talk too much about things that I don't have absolute knowledge that it's 100% proof. I don't like rumors. But I have direct knowledge of, in a lot of Amish communities, there is a lot of child sex crimes. There just is. It happens all the time. The biggest reason it's such a problem in the Amish is because the Amish Church covers it. They make it go away.
I'm Monica Miller, and I grew up old order Amish in northern Indiana. It's been 5 years since we left. And being a bishop's wife in the Amish Church, we saw a lot of things happening that was not good for our people. A lot of covering up. And because of that, I took the chance to be a person that can bring awareness.
Who are the Amish? Within Christianity, the Amish, along with several other groups like the Mennonites and Hutterites, are part of the Anabaptists. The Anabaptists had their origins in the Reformation 500 years ago. At that time in Europe, most of the churches were connected to the state in some way, and the Anabaptists believed that Christians ought to be separate from the world, including the church being separate from the state. As a result, the Anabaptists were persecuted and ended up fleeing to the Americas. The Amish are named after one of their leaders, Jacob Ammon. He lived about 300 years ago, and he was concerned about the lack of discipline within the church and ended up being very divisive. And the group that split off and followed him became known as the Amish. In the early 1900s, as technology began to advance, the Amish started rejecting the technology. No cars, no electricity, no television, no telephones, no radios, no music. And along with it, they began to insist on uniformity and plainness in dress and a simple lifestyle. In the horse and buggy communities of today, there's a wide variety, but some things are the same, like the use of the horse and buggy. Languages is another one. The Amish use 3 languages. At church, for scripture reading and the religious documents, they use an old form of High German. At home, they speak a dialect of German called Pennsylvania Dutch, and at work and school and in the community, they speak English. Of these 3 languages, English is the only one that they learn to read, write, and speak in. This creates an interesting scenario. In some of the churches that are more lenient and less controlling, they allow their members to read the Bible in German and in English, and they encourage their members to read Christian literature, even if it's in English. But on the other side of the spectrum, you have the more strict churches who forbid their members to read the Bible in anything besides German, and they discourage their members from reading literature from the outside Christian world. This lack of understanding of Scripture has caused a lot of fear and confusion among many Amish communities. And so what started out as a sincere desire to be separate from the world has turned into an isolation from the world, and not only an isolation from the world, but an isolation from the rest of Christianity, and has opened up the people within these churches to control, manipulation, and abuse.
Society and what the Amish want society to view them as is these quiet, innocent, God-loving people that don't have problems. They're the perfect, back in the woods, you don't see them people. That is very far from the truth. Let's not act like that doesn't exist. Many, many, many Amish out there are just like that, or they try to be. But they accept and allow the problems to continue, and they don't put a stop to them, which is why I have a problem with it. If they would speak up, they could have that image that they're portraying, but instead of fixing their problems, they put them under the rug. So I don't want to act like every Amish person out there is doing this, okay? Don't let me portray that. But the image that they portray is just not accurate.
My name is Gordon Hinke, and I'm from Middlebury, Indiana. And I'm also a pastor locally. And I've been working among the Amish for over 40 years. And some of the things that I see from the outside that trouble me is, over and over again, I see how justice is overridden by protection and by wanting to cover so it doesn't bring a bad name or a hardship to the Amish name.
When the Amish say, we take care of the issues within our church, this is what that looks like. They will take the abuser that has done a crime or whatever it may have been, and they will shun or excommunicate that person for about 4 to 6 weeks. I've interviewed many victims that said that they watched their own abusers get roughly about 4 to 6 weeks. And then that means they make them feel shameful, and they got to eat separately. They can't eat with somebody else that's a church member or a family member that's been baptized. And once that time is up, they will vote on forgiveness. And once the abuser is forgiven, you're supposed to drop it. You cannot bring it back up. Forget and forgive. So even if the victim brings it back up, the victim can actually get harsher punishment than the abuser for not forgiving. So if you do bring it back up as a victim, that is looked at as you did not forgive, so now we got to punish you. So once the vote is done and they say you are now taken back into the church, you're forgiven, that abuser is literally released right back into their home, where the victim, most of them, I'd say probably 90-some% of the abusers were in the household with the victim. It's usually family. That's what it looks like with all the testimonies anyway. So it's usually a family member, and it's usually incest. So they are then forgiven and put right back into the home. And since they are set up in a way to where they can hide it in the church, shove it under the rug, so to speak, they are able to get by with that. And even if it's a multiple offense, the abuser is always forgiven, and you are not allowed to bring that back up. So if you do, you can get punished for bringing that back up, because they look at it as you have not forgiven.
The Amishes don't have access to information. When it comes to knowing just basic knowledge about predators and about sexual crimes and anything like that, they don't have the information. In school, the books they have don't teach them that. The books teach them about happy stuff and about how Sally has a lemonade stand. They don't teach you about, the basic, I guess, knowledge that we have out here of things that happen like that, to where a child can quickly catch on and say, hey, this is not okay. Elders of the community make sure, they would consider that taboo or wrong to have those types of pamphlets or books or information available to them. They don't have TVs. Most old order community will not have cell phones unless they do what I did and snuck one in, but I got in trouble for that. So most will not have cell phones. So the only information they get is from a newspaper, and usually it's an Amish newspaper like The Budget, which has good information. It's a good paper, but it has nothing in there about that type of stuff. And if it does, the parents or the elders will get a hold of it and wipe that edition out before the kids ever get a hold of it. They don't let them have books about it. They don't explain it to them, really. There's just no education. There's no way of them knowing the basic fundamentals of how not to be a victim.
I was even taught in my Amish community not to talk to outsiders about their way of life or anything they do as far as the rules. There's a reason for that. They don't want to be part of the world, they say. So they for many generations, for hundreds of years, since they were created, have been in their own little religious bubble. They are left alone, and nobody really knows what is going on that is not Amish. So therefore, when there is abuse, no one knows. They are able to hide it better than any other religious group in the world. They can actually hide it because of how their system is set up.
When it comes to cultural issues, that's probably the biggest obstacle I see with law enforcement when they go out to try to address the problem. The cultural difference when it comes to law enforcement is law enforcement will approach them as the public image shows Amish, instead of the way that we know Amish actually work most of the time. And so they're going to manipulate them. They're going to know that they're approaching them not knowing how their culture works. So they're going to let law enforcement believe that they're this innocent, sweet, God-fearing, don't cause any problems person, when they know exactly what they're doing, And that's not, their level of education is higher than that. They know what they're doing. They're being narcissistic people that are protecting themselves and manipulating the system.
There's a lot of things going on, and a lot of people know about it, but they will not report. They will try to keep everything hush hush. And so we need to start holding people accountable. And I think we have to start with leadership in the church. We have to start holding them accountable for not reporting, and we have to start holding parents accountable for not reporting.
Bishops of the church tries to say that they don't necessarily have to report it. So most of the time, at some point, the suspect will feel guilty if they have any relationship with their faith or with God. So they will report it to the church at some point. And most of the time, the church will then forgive them, and that's as far as it goes. They don't report it. So anybody that has knowledge of that, as we all know, if we have been around for any period of time recently, mandatory reporting is taken very seriously. And a lot of people, if they're found not to have reported it, will get prosecuted for it. But the Amish don't follow those guidelines. There are some areas now that are cracking down on that are prosecuting bishops or elders of the church for not reporting it when they know it's going on. I know in our area, they won't come forward, but the bishops here have been semi-cooperative when we are openly investigating a case. When the detectives interview them, they'll say, yeah, this was said, but there's a lot of times when I wonder if they're withholding information also, because it just doesn't ever seem to be quite the full story. They'll admit to some stuff, but it's just never quite, like for example, in a child sex case we were once investigating in our community, the bishop said that the only thing that was confessed was an inappropriate hug, that he hugged her for longer than he needed to basically feel her body against his. But the allegations were quite different than that, and that's all the bishop would confess to. The church doesn't want the victim to talk. It's embarrassing. It's a black eye for the church. So, and a lot of the leaders of the church are some of the main ones doing it. They don't want them to talk. You will get punished more as a victim for causing problems for the church and involving law enforcement than you will as the person doing the crimes. If you're the suspect in a child sex crime, you're probably going to have much more support from the church than your victim.
When it comes to Amish and rehabilitation centers, the rehab facilities that are Amish owned and Amish operated, they send them there to reprogram the Amish way, the Amish system, and they teach them and reprogram them to think their way, forget and forgive, all of those things. Now, I want you to understand that these facilities are not licensed like you would out here in the non-Amish world. The facilities are not licensed, and also the counselors are not licensed. Almost every single one of these facilities has either bishop, current bishop, or a former bishop, or a former pastor or deacon, or a current pastor or deacon, and they teach how their system's set up to follow the rules and the ordinance, and that there's really no proper help for the victim. It's usually always focused more on the abuser to move forward and not expose them to the outside world. They want to stay away from the court system, grand juries, and judges. They don't agree in any of those systems that's set up, and they look at it as the world of the world. So they want to handle it themselves. So that's why they have their own non-licensed counselors and non-licensed rehab facilities. And these facilities do not have the proper resources like we would out here. They want you to continue to stay focused on their ordinance and their rules, and they want you to operate under that, rather than actually get counseling to help move past that pain and that hurt that you went through.
So we here at Amish Rescue Mission, we have a safe touch, not safe touch poster, and that is something that you will need if you are working with Amish children. It is very important that you educate them on what safe touch, not safe touch is, because a lot of them do not know it. And if you ask them if they have been abused, most of them will say no, because they have no idea what that is. And so the first thing you need to do is get that material from us. You need to email us and ask for information on our education. When you are questioning Amish children, the parents should not be in there with them. Nobody should be in there with them that is from the Amish. You should use the interpreters that are available. These interpreters can speak Amish, they know the culture, and it is very important that they are safe and understood, and not, especially in situations where you ask a child a question and their parents are sitting in there with them, they will look at their parents before they even answer you. That's a huge sign that you need to get them out. You need to get an interpreter in there.
If you happen to ever come across a situation like that, especially in law enforcement, rely on your resources, because the Amish will I guarantee you, if you deal with them in enough situations, they will start speaking their native language and you won't know what they're saying. And usually that is a sign that they're saying things that you really want to know what they're saying. So have an interpreter if you at all can. If you're in law enforcement, you already know that in most sex crimes that you'll have an advocate. It's standard procedure for most departments, you'll get an advocate. An advocate is trained to not do what the Amish do and traumatize them further, but to help them, which is why I think it's highly important to have a trained professional advocate for you, and then you're going to benefit greatly off of an interpreter. If you use an advocate or an interpreter, I strongly discourage you from using what they provide. So if you're from a rural area in some place where you may not have access to an interpreter or an advocate, I very much discourage you from letting the Amish provide those for you, because they're going to provide who benefits them the best. It may be a family member or even the suspect of the one that committed this crime and you just don't know it. So when you have your victim and you have a family member or an elder of the church or somebody that they appoint to both interpret for you, translate, and advocate for the victim because they know them, you're most likely, almost 100% of the time, going to hurt your investigation, not get the information you want, and you're going to re-victimize the victim worse than they already were. Through Interpreters Unlimited, you can get an interpreter basically at your fingertips at any time nationwide. The victim gets victimized so much worse if they ever are brave enough to come forward, or if the situation gets so bad to where they have to come forward, the victim gets traumatized even worse, in my opinion, than they did for the actual act. One, deal with it and shut up. And two, pray about it. Go to God with it. Go to God with it, pray about it, forgive the perpetrator. Forgive them, pray about it, don't talk about it, don't talk to the cops, because that will just cause more problems for you and everybody else. So the people that are trying to help are people that saw the problem and couldn't stand it, left the community, and are now trying desperately to do anything they can to help the victims. Some of the victims don't know they're victims. You can go out and ask them, if this is going on, and they're not even going to be sure what you're talking about, because it may be a secret game that their older cousin or their older brother or their father or their uncle or whoever is playing with them, and that they don't talk about it because, it might get them in trouble, and they don't necessarily know why it would be in trouble because they don't know what's going on, but they know they have this secret game. And yet others know exactly what's going on, and they just don't talk about it because, the Amish from day one teach them you don't talk about it. It's very difficult to not only educate the community as a whole to look for it and do something about it, but to get the victims to cooperate, to want to do anything. So there's going to have to be a mentality in that entire community that changes to be able to get help to them. It's going to take a combined effort from re-educating the Amish, like elders, through, generations, or just cracking down on them from law enforcement, and changing law enforcement's perspective and helping law enforcement understand the mindset behind the perpetrators. There are some Amish out there that still have the image that we see them as, but most of them know enough now that they know they're manipulating law enforcement. So to change it, we're going to have law enforcement see past that, work past that, figure out ways to re-educate the community, and find people on the inside that will help them. Go to Amish Rescue Mission, get some resources, ask some questions, to where it's a combined effort between the elders of the church and law enforcement that will slow it down. You start seeing 2 or 3 people go in a community for something like that, get locked up, suddenly that community doesn't have those problems anymore near as bad, and a lot more victims come forward because they now know that it's bad. They just heard about it for the first time in their life, that this is an awful thing. So it's going to be a combined effort between law enforcement and the elders.